First, here's what I like. Number 1, the cage looks good. Number 2, it's got plenty of room. Number 3, it makes good use of space with the shelf on the bottom and the vertical stacking. The doors swing wide open to give you excellent access to the cage, which is a breath of fresh air. Additionally, those doors actually slide off, which is not really advertised as a feature, and I discovered it by accident, but it really comes in handy when you're trying to reach inside and outside the cage to attach something. Speaking of washers, the bars on the Ferret Nation cage are about 1 inch apart, so you'll need at least a 1 1/4 inch washer to span the gap. I use 1 1/2 inch washers when I can, although for a couple of accessories that had set diameters on the screw holes, I had to use a slightly smaller washer. Another really nice thing about the cage is that there's a connection from the top to the bottom via this opening here. It actually leads to a ramp which can be folded up the way that it is now to prevent the animals from moving up and down. That's helpful if your chinchillas don't like each other the way mine don't. The grating on the ramp is about 1/2 inch apart. It's probably not quite a good idea for them to walk on it, so I ended up finding these thatch mats at Tractor Supply Company, and I just toss one of those over the space. I might look for a more permanent solution later. I'm not able to take advantage of it, but the division is a great thing both for cleaning and for safety. Some cages this tall have an ability for the animal to fall all the way from the top to the bottom, but because this cage is divided, that can't happen. You also, if your animals get along, have the option of herding them up to the top while you clean the bottom and vice versa. It's a really good design. Here's a better look at the fold-up ramp with the pan lifted out. You can see the difference in the wire width. See, about 1 inch versus what looks like 1/2 inch. Here's the ramp by itself. Here's the opening it leaves behind. The ramps do all come with these fleece covers, which I didn't bother with. I suspect my chinchillas might chew them for starters. I don't feel like washing them for finishers. And on top of that, they're ugly. I can't figure out why a cage that advertises this nice, attractive finish makes all of its accessories in whatever kind of blue that is and purple. You might have noticed that I made some modifications to the cage and have some third-party things installed. That brings me to what I don't like about the cage. If you have either chinchillas or high standards, you can expect yourself to make a significant number of modifications to it, which I'm going to walk you through in later parts of this video. But honestly, I still would recommend the cage because as far as I can tell, it's the best thing out there. It's sad that that's the state of affairs, but it's a good cage once you put in the time at the beginning to get it set up right. Now for the problems with the cage, let's start with the pans. It comes with these shallow 1/2 inch plastic pans. If you have chinchillas and any intentions of using shavings or paper bedding, these will not do. Chinchillas kick the shavings out entirely too much and too far. Most people end up buying these third-party stainless steel pans from Bass Equipment Company. They come with their own problems, namely noise, which I'll discuss how to address in a later part of this video. Just be prepared for the fact that you probably won't be able to use these pans unless you're willing to avoid using bedding entirely. They do, however, work well as covers for the top and bottom shelves if you end up using replacement pans. Issue number 2 is the assembly. This is the newer model of the Ferret Nation cage. It's designed to mostly snap together rather than using screws like the old one. However, I had a lot of issues with parts that were sort of bent. One case where there was a little paint blocking one part from sliding into another one, and a couple of parts that were really, really hard to get together, and in one case to get apart. So despite the claims of easy assembly, be prepared for the fact that you are probably, unless you happen to get one where everything's made perfectly, going to have to struggle with this thing a little bit to get it together. Have a rubber mallet handy. Believe me, it helps. Another problem is the noise. Don't get me wrong, for the most part, this is a quiet cage. I really like that the sidewalls are welded in place so they don't jingle around. However, due to the way that the cage is assembled, the bottom gratings are actually just resting loosely in there. So when the animal hops around on them, you might hear a loud jingling noise. That's another thing that I've found some ways to deal with, which I'll discuss later. The ramps, which go both from the top section of the cage to the bottom, are also pretty noisy. There are 3 ramps. The other 2 go from the mid shelves to the floor. I have chinchillas, which are pretty good jumpers, so I haven't even bothered to include those ramps. It's not worth the trouble of trying to get the noise free. Additionally, when the doors are closed, you might get some jingle coming from here. You can offset that by just getting a sheet of adhesive felt at a craft store like Michael's and cutting out little semicircles to go here. That concludes my review. Now let's talk about putting the cage together and how you can modify it to overcome some of its flaws. First of all, the instructions tell you to start out by attaching these roller wheels. The trouble with that is that you might have to force some of the later cage parts on pretty hard, and I'm afraid that that puts a lot of stress on those wheels. So my suggestion is leave the wheels off for starters. Put something like this underneath it to protect your floor because you might have to push down pretty hard on some of the other parts. Just make sure you have a second pair of hands with you to tilt the cage on its side a little later to attach those wheels once the cage is all put together. Soon it's going to be time to put in the first floor grating. Unlike the side panels, which are welded in and don't jingle at all, the floor pan actually just sits in there. So as you can imagine, as the animal jumps on it, it jingles quite a bit. Here's how to avoid that. At Lowe's, you can buy these little red caps. These are number 8 screw protectors. They fit really nicely on the ends of the grating. Here you can see a grating that already has them attached. Those will absorb some of the vibration and protect you from the worst of the metal-on-metal clink. Honestly, the cage should come standard with these already attached. As you can see, the rubber caps don't stick out enough that they can be chewed, and it's a little harder to get this tray in place, but it's worth the effort. I only bother to put those rubber caps here and here because that's where the animal actually jumps around. To hear the difference, contrast this top piece where I didn't bother to put any with this second piece down. With protection, without. And that is how I sleep at night. My most severe complaint with the cage is actually a safety complaint. They put a whole bunch of hooks along the bottom here, which is good if you're planning to attach cage accessories, but I'm a little bit worried about an animal jumping up into them and hurting his or her back. Another reason that's an issue is that this is only held into the side of the cage by tension, and if hit the right way, it can collapse, which is a really terrible oversight that could lead to serious injury for an animal. That's another thing I'll show you how to fix later on. Next up, let's talk about how to fix that safety problem with the shelves. The shelves just lift in like this. There's nothing actually that clamps them in. The problem with that is if you lift up on them just right, they're able to fall. But since they're only able to fall if they're able to lift up, the key is to use something to keep them from lifting. That's why I have these 1 1/4 inch long screws clamped to the side of the cage with washers. This one's high enough up that it can slide freely through here, whereas the one on the back is planted down really firmly on top of that support bar. Now, with just that little screw in place, it's not able to lift up, so it's not able to fall. That's another thing that Midwest really should have had built into the cage. It's just not acceptable for this to be unsafe when a simple clamp or screw can fix it. Next up are the pans from Bass Equipment Company. They're stainless steel, pretty pricey, but worth it. If you have chinchillas, something like this is an absolute must, and it's really nice that it is made to fit the cage. Having said that, Bass Equipment Company apparently did not care whether I would ever sleep again. They don't provide or suggest anything to mitigate the horrible clanging you get with a metal pan on a metal base. Luckily, and somewhat humorously, the packing material saves the day. The pans ship in this giant cardboard box from which you can cut sheets to go under the metal pans. On top of that, they're protected by these very thick, sturdy L-shaped cardboard pieces to put around the outsides. For me, what worked well was to leave this one its original length. I didn't cut that one at all. The back one on the bottom is the right length, but on the top has to be cut for that cutout in the corner. And then on the other side, you just cut it to fit. The key is to get it to go inside the frame on that end and stick in front of the frame on that end. You get just about the right fit if you do that. For the finishing touch, take one of your extra pieces and slide it in there. And with that, you've got a fairly snug fit. And your clanging problem is vastly improved. Now that the cage is set up, let's talk about the accessories. Like most people, I bought the cage accessories from Bass Equipment Company. That starts with these urine guards. I don't have a problem with urine spraying out at crazy angles, but chinchillas scatter their shavings everywhere, so these are a prudent idea. Unfortunately, Bass Equipment Company apparently didn't give any thought to noise. Their guards attach with these little C-hooks, and they really just hang there. So you might as well be clanging pots and pans all night. I spent a while trying to attach these with washers to keep them from shaking, but no matter what I did, I couldn't get rid of that clang. So finally, I rethought everything, and I suspended the guard away from the cage by part of an inch. You can see it's attached at the bottom now, instead of at the top, and it's tilting upward at a slight angle. Now obviously some debris can still fall through the edges there, but it should fall straight down where it's easy to clean up. So I don't have a problem with that. Most importantly, since the guard is not touching the cage, it doesn't make any clanging noises unless you really get it going. To attach these, I used 1-inch long number 10 screws from Lowe's and 2 washers. I could only get 1 1/4-inch washers that were compatible with the number 10 screws. These are a little smaller. You have to position them just right, but they work fine. Then I've got 4 nuts on here to act as spacers. And then after positioning the guard itself, I just tie it on with a wing nut. It works remarkably well. Let's take a quick tour of the third-party accessories I have installed. First of all, here is actually a bird dish from Essentials that I bought at Pet Value. The nice thing about it is that, like most good cage accessories, it actually bolts onto the side of the cage with washers. That is a must when your chinchillas like to rip things off the edge. The cage jingles a little bit with the dish attached to it, unless you turn it upside down. You can't really tell, but I actually have it attached upside down, and for whatever reason that causes the dish to lock in nicely and stay stable. Avoiding jingle is always a struggle with chinchilla accessories. That brings me to my hay keeper. This was bought at Tractor Supply Company. It's from a company called Critterware. I like it because it's metal and chew resistant, although they can chew the paint off. I just hope it's animal safe. It seems to be so far. One issue you'll have with it because it's metal is jingle, but you can offset that by buying some washers at Lowe's and attaching it to the side like you would any other accessory. My last notable accessory is the Gargantuan 15-inch chin spin wheel. I'm drawing a blank on the name of the company that makes it, but believe me, if you Google chin spin, it will turn up. It's a hefty $100, but if you're interested in a wheel, it really is the one to buy. I had it on my previous cage, and it attaches just as well to this one. As a side note, the Ferret Nation manufacturer advises you against attaching a wheel like this to the side of the cage, but I've seen lots of other owners using this wheel with this cage, so I have to assume it will be fine. And there you have it. The Ferret Nation cage.